Picture a world where the first cities ever built rise from the fertile land between two rivers, where kings speak to gods, and where the very fabric of human civilization is being woven for the very first time. This is the world of the Sumerians, a people so advanced, so enigmatic, that their legacy still echoes through the centuries. But beneath their towering ziggurats and groundbreaking inventions lay secrets strange, unsettling, and downright bizarre practices that defy modern understanding. What drove these ancient pioneers to bury their dead with golden helmets, or to consult the livers of sheep for divine messages? Why did they believe the universe was created in a cosmic battle between gods, or that the first human was fashioned from clay and the blood of a slain deity? The Sumerians weren't just humanity's first civilization. They were also one of the most peculiar. From the bustling streets of Ur to the sacred temples of Nippur, their customs blurred the line between devotion and delirium. They wrote the world's first epic poem, but also feared demons lurking in every shadow. They invented the wheel, yet turned to dream interpreters to predict the future. Their kings claimed to be chosen by the gods, but their rituals often involved practices so strange they'd make even the most seasoned historian pause. Some of their beliefs were hauntingly beautiful, others downright macabre, but all of them reveal a people grappling with the mysteries of existence in ways we can barely fathom today. So let's step into their world where the ordinary and the uncanny collide. Over the next several minutes, we'll uncover 30 of their most astonishing practices, each one a window into a mindset both alien and eerily familiar. Whether it's their obsession with celestial omens, their intricate burial rites, or their chilling methods of justice, these customs will challenge everything you thought you knew about the dawn of civilization. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a descent into the surreal. And by the end, you'll see the Sumerians not as distant figures in a history book, but as living, breathing people whose fears, hopes, and rituals might just haunt your dreams. Ready to begin? Then let's unravel the strangest secrets of the ancient Sumerians. Imagine being paid for a hard day's labor not with coins or paper money, but with a frothy, golden pint of beer. For the Sumerians, this wasn't just a fantasy, it was everyday life. In the world's first known wage system, workers along the Tigris and Euphrates received their daily rations in beer, a currency as vital as silver or grain. But this wasn't just about quenching thirst, it was a sophisticated economic engine, a sacred tradition, and even a form of social control woven into the fabric of their civilization. The Sumerians didn't just drink beer, they perfected it. Their brewing process was so advanced that modern archaeologists have reconstructed their recipes from ancient clay tablets. Barley was soaked, malted, and fermented in massive vats, often under the watchful eye of priestesses who oversaw the sacred art of brewing. The result: a thick, porridge-like drink called sikaru, sipped through straws to filter out bits of grain. But this brew wasn't just for celebration. It was nutritious, calorie-rich, and safer to drink than water from the rivers teeming with parasites. That's why it flowed through every layer of society, from the humblest laborer to the king himself. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. Temples acted as the world's first breweries and banks, distributing beer as wages to workers building ziggurats or digging canals. A standard daily ration was around 2 liters, enough to fuel a worker's strength, but not enough to leave them stumbling. This system wasn't just practical, it was a way to bind society together. Refuse your beer ration and you might be seen as rejecting the god's blessing. Skimp on a worker's allotment and you risk divine wrath. Even trade agreements between cities were sealed with shared beer, turning every sip into a sacred contract. But beer's role went deeper than economics. It was a bridge between mortals and the gods. The Sumerians believed their deities craved beer just as humans did, pouring out offerings to appease them. Some myths even claimed beer was a divine gift invented by the goddess Ninkasi to bring joy to humanity. In a world where survival was uncertain, beer became a symbol of civilization itself, proof that humans could harness nature's chaos and turn it into something orderly, communal, and profoundly human. So the next time you raise a glass, remember, you're not just tasting a drink, you're tasting history's first paycheck. In the shadow of Sumer's towering ziggurats, another ritual unfolded, one that would shock modern sensibilities yet held profound spiritual meaning for the ancients. Temple prostitution wasn't about exploitation or vice to the Sumerians. It was a sacred communion with the divine, a physical prayer to Inanna, the fiery goddess of love, war, and fertility. When a priestess or temple servant engaged in these rites, she wasn't merely performing an act, she was channeling the goddess herself, transforming intimacy into a cosmic bridge between heaven and earth. This practice stemmed from a worldview where sexuality and spirituality were inseparable. Inanna's temples doubled as centers of sacred marriage, where the annual Hyros Gomos ritual reenacted her union with the shepherd god Dumuzi. Kings would even participate, symbolically marrying a high priestess to ensure the land's fertility and the kingdom's prosperity. Ordinary citizens, too, might visit these temples not for pleasure, but as an act of devotion, believing such encounters brought them closer to the divine. The act itself was seen as a microcosm of creation, echoing the gods' primal forces that birthed the universe. What makes this even more fascinating is how these rituals blurred social boundaries. Temple prostitutes, known as nadatu, often held significant status. Some managed property, oversaw trade, and even lent silver at interest. Their role wasn't stigmatized but revered, seen as essential to maintaining cosmic order. Contrast this with later civilizations that would condemn similar practices, and you begin to grasp how radically different Sumerian values were. They didn't separate body from spirit. To them, the act of love was as sacred as a hymn or sacrifice. Yet there's a darker layer here. Some texts suggest not all participants entered these rituals willingly, hinting at a complex interplay between devotion and coercion. And while the temple rites were celebrated, ordinary prostitution outside the sacred sphere carried no such prestige. This duality reveals a society wrestling with the same tensions we face today between liberation and control, between the sacred and the profane. The Sumerians simply framed these questions through the lens of divine will, turning human desires into a dialogue with the gods. By modern standards, these practices seem paradoxical, both empowering and unsettling. But they force us to confront how cultures construct meaning around intimacy, power, and the divine. Where we might see exploitation, the Sumerians saw communion. Where we draw strict boundaries between sacred and secular, they saw fluidity. Their temple rites challenge us to reconsider not just ancient history, but our own assumptions about the intersections of body, faith, and society. Beneath the bustling markets and sacred temples of Sumer, another darker practice thrived, one where words became weapons and clay tablets transformed into instruments of divine vengeance. The Sumerians didn't just write shopping lists or royal decrees on their cuneiform tablets. They etched curses into the soft clay, invoking gods to strike down their enemies with sickness, ruin, or even death. These weren't idle threats scribbled in anger. They were meticulously crafted spells, believed to harness the very power of the gods themselves. The process was as deliberate as it was chilling. A wronged individual would seek out a scribe or priest skilled in the art of curse-making. Using a reed stylus, they'd press symbols into a damp clay tablet, spelling out the target's name, their alleged crimes, and the desired punishment. Some tablets called for specific afflictions. May Nergal, Lord of Plague, rot his bones, while others left the vengeance to the god's discretion. Let the heavens rain misery upon him until his name is erased from memory. Once inscribed, the tablet might be buried near the victim's home, placed in a temple sanctuary, or even thrown into a river, symbolically carrying the curse to the underworld where the gods of judgment resided. What makes these curses so haunting is their sheer specificity. One tablet from Lagash curses a thief who stole a loaf of bread, demanding his hands wither so he may never lift food to his mouth again. Another targets a rival merchant, invoking Inanna to burn his stalls like dry reeds and leave his children begging in the streets. The Sumerians didn't distinguish between physical and supernatural justice. To them, a curse was as real as a dagger to the gut. Even kings used them. Sargon of Akkad reportedly buried curses beneath the foundations of conquered cities to ensure their obedience. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. These tablets reveal a society deeply afraid of imbalance. Curses weren't just about revenge. They were a way to restore the cosmic order when human justice failed. If a corrupt official escaped punishment or a murderer walked free, the cursed tablet became the last resort, appealing directly to the divine court. And the fear was mutual. Archaeologists have found anti-curse tablets pleased to gods to nullify suspected curses, proving how deeply these beliefs permeated everyday life. Yet for all their terror, these curses also humanized the Sumerians in unexpected ways. Behind each tablet lies a raw, relatable emotion: a betrayed spouse, a cheated farmer, a grieving parent. Their words echo across millennia not as arcane spells, but as cries for justice in a world where power often trumped fairness. In that sense, their curses weren't so different from modern lawsuits or social media call-outs, just with a far more supernatural twist. So the next time you grumble about a neighbor or co-worker, be grateful your revenge options don't include summoning ancient gods with a piece of clay. High above the mud brick cities of Sumer, the gods weren't just watching, they were walking among their people, or so the ancient texts claim. The Sumerian pantheon wasn't filled with the vague, ethereal spirits of later religions. These deities were startlingly tangible, often described as towering figures descending from the heavens in fiery vessels. Their appearances so bizarre that modern scholars still debate whether they were myths or something far stranger. At the heart of this mystery stand the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, a group of gods whose depictions blur the line between divine and extraterrestrial. Take Enki, the god of wisdom, often shown with a serpentine body and hands holding enigmatic objects resembling modern tools, or Inanna, who ascended through the 7 gates of the heavens, an ascent detailed like a prehistoric astronaut's checklist, shedding physical attributes at each level. But the most striking is Ningishzida, a serpent-headed deity associated with rebirth, whose symbol, 2 intertwined serpents, would later echo across cultures as the caduceus. These weren't just artistic choices. Clay tablets describe their melam, a radiant aura so intense it could blind mortals, and their ability to travel the dark between stars in divine boats. What fuels modern speculation isn't just their appearance, but their behavior. The Anunnaki didn't reign from some distant celestial throne. They lived in Sumer's cities, assigning themselves human tasks. Enlil oversaw agriculture, Utu regulated justice, Nisaba taught writing. They bickered, schemed, and even enslaved humans to build their temples, as recounted in the epic Atrahasis, where gods grow weary of labor and create mankind to bear their burdens. This isn't the detached omnipotence of later gods. It's the messy, hands-on leadership of beings deeply entangled with humanity. Theories about their origins range from the poetic to the provocative. Some scholars argue these gods personified natural forces, Enlil as storm, Inanna as Venus. Others point to the ancient astronaut hypothesis, suggesting the Anunnaki were advanced visitors whose technology sparked Sumer's sudden leap into civilization. After all, how else to explain texts like the Tale of Adapa, where a mortal is offered the bread and water of eternal life by Anu, only to refuse it, fearing a trick? The parallels to later tales like the Garden of Eden are uncanny. Yet Sumer's versions lack moral judgment, just pragmatic exchanges between flawed gods and their creations. Their influence seeped into every facet of Sumerian life. Kingship was literally lowered from heaven, with rulers like Gilgamesh touting divine ancestry. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were cosmic portals, ziggurats designed as stairways for gods to descend. Even law codes echoed divine decrees. Hammurabi's famed laws were handed down by Shamash, the sun god. To reject these gods wasn't heresy, it was to risk the very fabric of reality, for they maintained the me, the universal laws binding everything from baking bread to the rotation of planets. Yet beneath the grandeur lies a haunting question. Why did these gods vanish? Later Babylonian and Assyrian texts demote the Anunnaki to underworld deities, their fiery chariots fading into myth. Perhaps they were always metaphors, their departure reflecting cultural shifts. Or perhaps, as some fringe theories suggest, they left their mission complete. Either way, the Sumerians left us more than just stories. They left a challenge to look at their gods not as primitive fantasies, but as a mirror to our own endless fascination with beings who might have walked among us. Long before chess or backgammon captivated players, the Sumerians were already rolling dice and moving pieces across a board with eerie precision. The royal game of discovered in the tombs of ancient Mesopotamia, wasn't just entertainment, it was a sacred ritual, a cosmic battle, and a social glue all rolled into one. Dating back over 4,600 years, this game's intricately carved board and polished stone pieces reveal a culture that saw play as anything but trivial. The rules, deciphered from a cuneiform tablet in the British Museum, show a game of both luck and strategy. Players race their pieces along a winding path of 20 squares, using pyramid-shaped dice to determine moves. But half the squares bore special markings, rosettes that granted extra turns or safe passage, turning each roll into a tense gamble, the stakes more than just pride. Some boards were found buried with kings, suggesting the game held power beyond the grave, perhaps as a test to prove one's worthiness in the afterlife. What makes this game truly remarkable is how deeply it was woven into Sumerian life. Temple courtyards often had game boards etched into their floors, hinting at rituals where priests might have played against the gods themselves. One theory suggests the board's layout mirrored the path of the moon through the sky, turning each match into a reenactment of celestial movements. Even children weren't excluded. Smaller, cruder boards found in homes prove this was a pastime bridging all ages and classes. But the game's influence didn't stop at Sumer's borders. Archaeologists have found nearly identical versions from Crete to India, spread along trade routes like a Bronze Age viral sensation. This wasn't just a game, it was a cultural handshake, a shared language between civilizations that otherwise spoke in wildly different tongues. The oldest rulebook in existence, a tablet from Babylon, even includes a player's poetic boast, "I will roll and the rosette will smile upon me," proving that trash talk is as ancient as the game itself. Yet beneath the playful surface lurked darker symbolism. Some scholars believe the rosette squares represented the unpredictable favor of the gods, teaching players to accept fate's twists with humility. Others see the piece's journey as a metaphor for the soul's perilous path through the underworld. In a society obsessed with divination, the roll of the dice might have been seen as a whisper from the divine, a lesson that even kings weren't masters of their own destiny. Today, you can still play the royal game of using replicas or digital versions, making it the oldest game continuously enjoyed by humanity. But as you move those pieces, remember, you're not just passing time. You're retracing the steps of priests, merchants, and maybe even a Mesopotamian child who, 4 millennia ago, cheered at landing on that lucky rosette. Few artifacts connect us so intimately to the past, proving that the urge to play and the thrill of victory transcends time itself. The Sumerians approached medicine with a blend of practicality and mysticism, but few of their practices shock modern sensibilities quite like their reverence for enemas. Far from a last resort treatment, these ancient physicians saw the ritual of cleansing the bowels as nothing short of sacred, a vital key to balancing the body's humors and expelling malevolent spirits believed to cause disease. Their medical texts, etched in cuneiform on clay tablets, prescribe enemas for ailments ranging from fevers to demonic possession, revealing a healthcare system where physical and spiritual healing were inextricably linked. The tools they used would make even the hardiest modern patient wince. Archaeologists have uncovered slender bronze tubes, intricately carved syringes made from animal bladders, and even clay vessels with long spouts designed to administer herbal infusions. One particularly elaborate set from included a gold-plated nozzle, likely reserved for nobility, inscribed with prayers to Gula, the goddess of healing. The Sumerians didn't just see these devices as medical instruments. They were conduits for divine intervention, often stored in temples alongside votive offerings. But what truly fascinates is the sophistication of their methods. Medical tablets describe enema solutions brewed from fermented beer, honey, and crushed tree bark, ingredients modern science now recognizes for their antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. Priests doubled as physicians, reciting incantations to Inanna, the patron deity of enemas, while administering treatments. Some protocols even specified lunar phases for optimal cleansing, tying bodily rhythms to celestial cycles. This wasn't crude guesswork. It was a system honed through centuries of observation, where the line between pharmacy and temple ritual blurred completely. The logic behind the practice reveals a worldview where illness stemmed from imbalance. Just as blocked canals caused famine, a clogged body invited disease. Enemas restored flow not just physically but spiritually. Texts describe demons fleeing through the bowels as tainted fluids drained away, a belief echoed in later Babylonian exorcism rites. Even kings submitted to routine cleansings, viewing them as essential as court audiences or military campaigns. Yet for all its strangeness, the Sumerian approach holds eerie resonance today. Modern detox cultures and colonic cleanses echo these ancient rituals, proving how enduring the allure of internal purification remains. The Sumerians simply framed it through the lens of divine order, a reminder that healing for them was never just about the body. It was about realigning the human vessel with the cosmos itself. Among the most startling discoveries in Sumerian burial sites are the elongated, cone-shaped skulls of infants, deliberately molded through a practice known as cranial binding. This wasn't the result of disease or accident, but a conscious choice by parents who tightly wrapped their babies' heads with cloth or bound them between wooden boards, reshaping their soft skulls over months. To modern eyes, it seems unthinkable, even cruel. But for the Sumerians, this transformation held profound significance, blurring the line between beauty, status, and the divine. The technique was deceptively simple yet required precise knowledge. Starting within days of birth, when an infant's skull bones were still malleable, caregivers would apply gentle but constant pressure using linen bands, padded boards, or even clay molds. Over time, the skull would grow upward or backward, depending on the binding style, creating dramatic silhouettes that lasted a lifetime. Archaeologists have found evidence of different styles. Some skulls taper sharply like spires, while others curve more subtly, suggesting regional variations or class distinctions. Remarkably, these children showed no signs of brain damage. The Sumerians had mastered a method that altered appearance without impairing function. But why? The answers lie in their reverence for the gods. Many deities in Sumerian art, particularly the Anunnaki, are depicted with elongated heads, their towering crowns or natural skulls setting them apart from mortals. By reshaping their children's heads, families may have sought to emulate the divine form, believing it granted favor or spiritual connection. Some tablets even describe the lofty-headed ones as intermediaries between heaven and earth, hinting that cranial binding could have marked certain children for priestly roles. Other theories suggest it denoted nobility, distinguishing elite lineages from commoners as visibly as a crown. The practice wasn't unique to Sumer. Similar traditions appeared in ancient Peru, Egypt, and the Hittite Empire, but the Sumerians may have been among the first to institutionalize it. Artifacts show high-status burials where bound skulls are adorned with gold fillet or lapis lazuli beads, implying these individuals held special status. Yet not all deformed skulls belong to the wealthy. Some are found in modest graves, indicating the practice crossed social boundaries. Perhaps it was a widespread ideal like modern orthodontics, where even ordinary families aspired to the aesthetic of the powerful. What's most haunting is how these skulls force us to confront our own biases. Today, we view such practices through a lens of medical ethics, recoiling at the idea of altering a child's body for cultural reasons. Yet the Sumerians would likely find our own beauty rituals, pierced ears, braces, or cosmetic surgery equally puzzling. Their choices weren't arbitrary. They reflected a universe where physical form carried cosmic meaning. A reshaped skull wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a prayer etched in bone, a parent's hope that their child might walk a little closer to the gods. When a Sumerian king faced war, famine, or a royal marriage, he didn't rely on advisors or gut instinct. He turned to a freshly slaughtered sheep's liver for answers. Hepatoscopy, the art of divining the future through organ inspection, wasn't just superstition to the Sumerians. It was a sophisticated science, a sacred dialogue with the gods etched in veins and lobes. Priests trained for decades to master this grisly craft, believing the liver, the body's blood-rich center, held messages from the divine, written in a language of bumps, ridges, and discolorations only the initiated could decipher. The ritual began with meticulous precision. A flawless lamb or goat, often white to symbolize purity, was led to an incense-filled chamber. As musicians played hymns to Shamash, the sun god and patron of divination, the animal's throat was slit in a single motion, ensuring the liver remained intact. The priest, or baru, would then extract the organ with copper tools, careful not to nick its surface. What followed wasn't random guesswork, but a systematic examination documented in clay, liver models, detailed replicas used as training aids, some even labeled with cuneiform notes like, "If the gallbladder is elongated, the enemy will retreat." Every feature carried meaning. A cleft in the right lobe might signal impending flood, while an extra lobe on the left could foretell royal betrayal. The gate of the palace, a natural fissure near the gallbladder, revealed threats to the king's authority. Even the liver's texture mattered. A spongy consistency warned of drought, as though the gods themselves were withholding life's vitality. The most alarming omen, a missing lobe which reportedly preceded the fall of entire dynasties. What's astonishing is how deeply this practice influenced statecraft. No major decision, from launching military campaigns to planting crops, proceeded without hepatoscopy. Archaeologists have found letters between kings and priests debating conflicting liver readings, proving these weren't rubber-stamp rituals but genuine debates. One tablet from Mari records a priest warning King Zimri Lim. The liver was without a head, do not march north. The king obeyed, and records show his rivals were ambushed weeks later on that very route. Coincidence? To the Sumerians, it was proof of divine intervention. Yet hepatoscopy wasn't foolproof. When predictions failed, priests didn't abandon the practice, they refined it. Some tablets describe retroactive omens, where scribes reinterpreted past liver signs to fit new outcomes, a hauntingly human attempt to preserve faith in the system. Others reveal clever loopholes. If a first reading was unfavorable, priests might perform additional sacrifices until the gods changed their minds, blending piety with pragmatism. Modern medicine sheds eerie light on their beliefs. The liver regenerates faster than any organ, a quality the Sumerians may have linked to rebirth and divine communication. And while we scoff at the idea of organs predicting battles, studies show livestock livers do reflect environmental stress, disease, toxins, or malnutrition that could indirectly hint at coming hardships. In a world without weather satellites or spy networks, hepatoscopy was less about magic than about seeking patterns in chaos, a Bronze Age data science. By the time Babylon rose, hepatoscopy had spread across the ancient world, evolving into the haruspex tradition of Rome. But its heart remained in Sumer, where for millennia priests and kings believed the universe spoke not through stars or dreams, but through the dark, glistening folds of a humble sheep's liver, a testament to humanity's eternal hunger to glimpse the future, no matter how visceral the method. In the dim glow of oil lamps, Sumerian priests passed a small, ornate vessel among worshippers, its contents a thick, dark paste that promised visions of the divine. This was no ordinary offering, but opium, one of humanity's oldest mind-altering substances, meticulously prepared to bridge the gap between mortals and their gods. Harvested from the poppy fields of distant lands and traded along routes stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, opium wasn't a recreational drug to the Sumerians. It was a sacrament, a key to unlocking realms where deities spoke plainly and the future unfolded like a scroll. The preparation ritual was as precise as it was sacred. Clay tablets from Nippur describe how priestesses would soak dried poppy heads in wine or honey, then strain the mixture through linen to create a potent tincture. Some texts even mention adding herbs like myrrh or mandrake to heighten its effects, creating a brew so powerful that initiates were warned to fast for days beforehand. The resulting concoction was often served in ceremonial cups shaped like the goddess Ninti, the Lady of Life, whose serpent and staff emblem, later borrowed by Greek healers, hinted at opium's dual role as both medicine and mystical conduit. When consumed, the effects were immediate and profound. Participants described swirling visions of Inanna descending from the heavens, her voice echoing through corridors of fire. Others claimed to walk among the Anunnaki in gardens of crystal, receiving prophecies or healing knowledge. One tablet from recounts how a merchant named Namu ingested opium before a temple ceremony and awoke with detailed instructions for a trading route that made him wealthy, a divine revelation he attributed entirely to the joy plant. But opium's role extended beyond individual ecstasy. During the annual Akitu festival, entire communities would partake in controlled doses, believing collective visions could reveal the god's will for the coming year. Some of the earliest known depictions of opium poppies appear on cylinder seals pressed into clay tablets, often alongside images of deities, suggesting the plant itself was seen as a gift from heaven. Even medical texts praised its powers, prescribing it for pain relief or insomnia, though always with warnings about the sleep from which one may not wake. The Sumerians understood opium's dangers as keenly as its blessings. Temple archives note strict protocols. Only trained priests could administer it, and never to pregnant women or the very young. One haunting account describes a novice who stole a double portion, only to vanish for 3 days before being found wandering the marshes, babbling about the black wings of error, the god of pestilence. Such cautionary tales underscored a delicate balance. Opium could open doors to the divine but disrespect its power, and those doors might never close again. What makes this practice so striking is how it mirrors modern debates about altered states and spirituality. The Sumerians didn't view opium-induced visions as hallucinations, but as heightened reality, a perspective shared by some contemporary indigenous traditions. Their rituals lacked the stigma later attached to mind-altering substances. Instead, they framed intoxication as a sacred technology, as deliberate and reverent as prayer. In a world where gods were as real as the Tigris floods, opium wasn't an escape, it was a lens, sharpening the gaze into realms beyond ordinary sight. Archaeological evidence supports their claims. Residue analyses of temple vessels in Gersu revealed traces of opiates alongside ceremonial wine, proving these accounts weren't mere myth. Even their terminology persists. The Sumerian word whole gil, joy plant, likely lent its name to the Greek opium, and by extension our modern opium. This linguistic thread ties us directly to those ancient devotees who, millennia ago, sought answers in the milky sap of a flower and believed with unwavering certainty that the gods answered back. Buried beneath the sun-baked soil of Sumer, the dead didn't simply disappear. They embarked on a journey, and their living relatives made sure they were prepared for every step of the way. The Sumerians treated death not as an end, but as a transition to a shadowy realm called Ker, a place where souls wandered eternally unless properly equipped. This belief led to burial customs that might seem extravagant or even unsettling today, but to them were as practical as packing a suitcase for a long voyage. From gold-adorned nobles to humble farmers clutching clay bowls, every grave tells a story of a civilization obsessed with outfitting the dead for the afterlife. Take the royal tombs of Ur, where archaeologists uncovered skeletons draped in elaborate jewelry, surrounded by harps, chariots, and even the bones of attendants who voluntarily followed their masters into death. One queen, Puabi, was buried with a headdress of golden leaves, lapis lazuli beads, and a retinue of 54 servants, each positioned as if frozen mid-task, some with cups still in their hands. But it wasn't just about wealth. These items had a sacred purpose. Texts describe Ker as a barren, dusty place where the dead drink from puddles and eat dust unless given offerings. A golden cup wasn't just treasure, it was a vessel to collect life-giving water in the underworld. A harp wasn't entertainment, its music could appease the dead's restless spirits. The positioning of bodies reveals even deeper symbolism. Commoners were often buried curled on their sides, knees drawn to chests, mimicking sleep or the fetal position, a hopeful nod to rebirth. Elites, however, were laid flat on their backs, gazing upward toward the heavens, their hands folded over chests holding cylinder seals inscribed with prayers. Some graves show bodies with feet deliberately broken post-mortem, possibly to prevent them from walking back to haunt the living. And in a haunting twist, infants were frequently interred under house floors, wrapped in reed mats as if tucked into bed, their tiny hands clutching miniature amulets to guide their souls. What's most striking is how these rituals reflect Sumer's social hierarchy even in death. While kings were buried with fleets of wooden boats for celestial travel, poor families might place just a single clay figurine of a protective spirit in the grave. Yet all shared one terror, the fear of being forgotten. That's why families poured monthly kispum offerings, beer, bread, and onions into pipes leading to burial chambers. To stop these offerings was to condemn an ancestor to wither into a hungry, vengeful ghost. Modern excavators often find graves with surprising intimacy. One skeleton clutches a worn-out sandal, perhaps a favorite possession. Another has a dog curled at its feet, not a sacrifice, but a pet clearly buried with care. These small, personal touches remind us that for all their elaborate beliefs, the Sumerians grieved much as we do. They just expressed it through rituals that ensured their loved ones wouldn't face eternity empty-handed. Their burial customs force a challenging question. How far would we go to prepare someone we love for the unknown? The Sumerians answered with everything from golden treasures to broken bones, all in service of a single idea: that death wasn't goodbye, but a departure to a place where the right tools and the right rituals might just make all the difference. A Sumerian merchant desperate for guidance wouldn't visit an oracle, he'd check into a temple for a night's sleep. This was dream incubation, a sacred practice where seekers lay in the shadowy chambers of ziggurats, waiting for gods to speak through their dreams. More than mere superstition, this ritual was a carefully orchestrated dialogue with the divine, blending sensory deprivation, ritual purity, and psychological conditioning to open a channel to the otherworldly. The process began with days of preparation. A petitioner would first undergo cleansing rites, bathing in sacred water, anointing themselves with cedar oil, and abstaining from meat, wine, and sexual activity. Only then could they enter the temple's dream chamber, often located deep within the ziggurat where the air hung thick with incense and the distant chants of priests. Here they'd lie on a special mat woven with protective symbols, clutching a clay figurine of the dream god Pasitu, believed to ward off malicious spirits that might distort visions. As they drifted off, priests would murmur incantations to Namta, the deity of fate, while burning a mix of juniper and hallucinogenic herbs to thin the veil between worlds. What unfolded in these dreams wasn't left to chance. Temples kept detailed dream books, clay tablets cataloging symbolic visions and their meanings. A dream of a flooded river might predict prosperity, while a crumbling temple wall warned of illness, but the most sought-after visions were direct encounters with gods. In one account, a woman named Inanna dreamed of Inanna placing a lapis lazuli necklace around her neck, an omen that later inspired her famed temple hymns. Another tablet describes a soldier who, after 3 nights in the temple, dreamed of Ninurta handing him a bronze dagger, a sign he'd survive his next battle. The brilliance of these rituals lay in their understanding of the subconscious. By isolating seekers in darkness, controlling their diet, and priming their expectations, priests created conditions ripe for vivid, emotionally charged dreams. They even employed dream stewards, attendants who'd whisper suggestive phrases as sleepers stirred, gently steering their visions. When morning came, a specialist called the dream seer would interpret the experience, often weaving it into a coherent prophecy that balanced divine mystery with practical advice. Yet this practice had its shadows. Some tablets warn of false dreams sent by trickster spirits, urging repeated visits, and more temple donations to confirm visions. Others reveal nightmares so terrifying that seekers abandoned the ritual mid-session, fleeing the chamber in panic. For all its sacred framing, dream incubation was also a psychological tightrope, offering solace to some while plunging others into deeper uncertainty. What endures is the Sumerians' profound insight that dreams weren't just random neural firings, but a language the divine might use to guide humanity. Their temples functioned as ancient sleep laboratories, exploring the intersection of faith and the mind's hidden landscapes. In an age before psychotherapy or brain scans, they understood what modern science now confirms: that the sleeping mind holds extraordinary power to heal, reveal, and transform. The only difference, they believed those whispers in the dark came from the gods. The Sumerians didn't just wear makeup, they painted their faces with poison. In the quest for beauty, they ground cinnabar, a vivid red mercury sulfide ore, into powders and ointments that adorned the lips and cheeks of nobles and temple dancers alike. This wasn't a careless choice. To them, mercury's shimmering brilliance symbolized divine radiance, a way to mimic the lustrous glow of gods like Inanna, whose depictions often featured fiery crimson pigments. What they couldn't know was that their sacred cosmetics were slowly killing them, with every application delivering doses of a neurotoxin that would accumulate in their bodies over years, leading to tremors, madness, and agonizing deaths. The allure of mercury-based makeup lay in its unmatched intensity. While commoners used safer clays and plant dyes, elites prized cinnabar for its permanence. It didn't fade in sunlight or smudge during temple ceremonies. Archaeologists have found tiny cinnabar-stained jars in royal tombs, some still bearing fingerprints where the last Chinese letter swirled their brush. Texts describe priestesses applying it before oracle rites, believing its reflective surface could catch the eye of the gods. Even men weren't exempt. Murals show bearded dignitaries with lips stained red as pomegranates, a mark of status and piety, yet the health toll was catastrophic. Modern analysis of Sumerian remains reveals mercury levels up to 50 times higher than safe thresholds, with symptoms matching acute heavy metal poisoning. skeletal deformities, chronic pain, and neurological decay. One scribe's diary from Lagash recounts a noblewoman's descent into shaking sickness, her hands trembling too violently to hold her mirror, a chilling parallel to Mercury's modern nickname, Quicksilver. Another text describes a court musician whose song turned to gibberish after years of wearing ceremonial face paint, likely a victim of mercury-induced dementia. What's most haunting is how their medical texts grappled with the fallout without ever pinpointing the cause. Physicians prescribed remedies for the beauty curse, headaches treated with willow bark, psychosis eased by opium, yet never connected these ailments to the very pigments their culture revered. Some even doubled down, grinding mercury into medicinal pastes for eye infections, unwittingly accelerating the damage. This tragic irony underscores a universal truth. Sometimes the things we worship most blindly are the ones that destroy us. The Sumerians' mercury obsession forces us to confront our own dangerous beauty standards. Like their cinnabar-laced cosmetics, modern trends, lead-laced lipsticks, asbestos in talc, or even extreme cosmetic surgeries reveal how far we'll go chasing an ideal, often ignoring the whispers of harm until it's too late. The difference: we have fewer excuses. When we tilt our heads toward the bathroom mirror today, applying our own versions of sacred paint, we do so with the ghostly lessons of those who came before us, their bones still whispering warnings across 4,000 years. Every spring, as the Tigris and Euphrates swelled with meltwater, the city of Uruk trembled with anticipation, not for flood or festival, but for the moment their king would ascend the ziggurat to consummate a marriage with a goddess. The sacred marriage rite, or hieros gamos, wasn't mere pageantry. It was the cosmic reset button for Sumerian civilization, a ritual so vital that its proper execution meant the difference between abundance and famine. At its heart stood the king, not just as ruler, but as stand-in for Dumuzi, the shepherd god whose mythical union with Inanna guaranteed the land's fertility. The priestess playing Inanna didn't merely recite lines. For one night, she became the goddess incarnate, her body the conduit between heaven and earth. The preparations lasted months. The priestess underwent rigorous purification, bathing in sacred water, fasting on bread and dates, and chanting hymns to prepare her voice to speak with Inanna's tongue. Meanwhile, the king trained like an athlete, memorizing ancient love poetry and practicing the precise choreography of the ritual. On the appointed day, the city held its breath as the couple processed up the ziggurat's 151 steps, each one representing a day in the growing season. Crowds below could hear the clatter of sistrums and smell the heady incense, myrrh, cedar, and something far more primal. Inside the shrine's inner chamber, the ceremony unfolded with theatrical precision. The priestess, draped in nothing but lapis lazuli beads and a gauzy veil, would challenge the king with riddles from the Song of Inanna and Dumuzi, testing his worthiness. Only if he answered correctly with lines like, "Your breast is the harvest moon, your voice the sweet ale that intoxicates the gods," would the union proceed. What followed wasn't mere symbolic theater. Tablets discreetly refer to the joining that makes the barley grow tall, leaving little doubt this was an actual coupling witnessed by select priests. The moment climaxed literally and spiritually, with the king pouring a libation onto the temple floor, mimicking Dumuzi's mythical semen bringing life to the barren earth. The societal ripple effects were immediate. Farmers timed their plantings to the rite's completion, believing seeds sown too early would wither without the god's blessing. Temple storehouses distributed special marriage bread, baked from the first post-ceremony harvest, eaten to absorb the fertility magic. Even law courts adjourned during the ritual's vulnerable hours, fearing any disruption might break the cosmic connection. But beneath the sacred veneer lay raw political calculus. Kings used the rite to cement power, with some like Shulgi of Ur, claiming to perform it annually rather than the traditional once per reign. Rebellions often coincided with failed harvests, interpreted as the gods rejecting the king's marital prowess. One fragmentary text hints at a brutal outcome for a ruler whose priestess partner failed to conceive afterward, whether by divine displeasure or palace coup. The implication is chilling. The rite's legacy outlived Sumer itself. Variations appeared in Babylon, where Marduk replaced Dumuzi, and echoes persist in myths from Isis and Osiris to Zeus and Hera. Yet none captured the visceral immediacy of Sumer's version, a civilization that didn't just pray for divine favor, but physically enacted it, blurring the line between mortal and immortal in the most intimate way imaginable. To dismiss it as primitive superstition misses the point. In a world where survival hinged on capricious rivers and fragile crops, the sacred marriage wasn't just ceremony. It was the ultimate act of hope, a yearly gamble that human devotion could sway the very forces of nature. Beneath the sacred temples of Sumer, archaeologists have unearthed tiny skeletons, some no larger than a loaf of bread, carefully arranged in ceramic jars or brick chambers, their fragile bones stained with traces of ritual ochre. These were not ordinary burials. The positioning of the remains, the presence of ceremonial daggers, and the inscriptions on nearby tablets all point to a practice that chills modern hearts: the deliberate sacrifice of children. While evidence remains fiercely debated, the grim possibility forces us to confront one of Sumer's darkest spiritual dilemmas: how far a civilization would go to bargain with forces beyond its control. The most compelling findings come from Ur's death pits, where clusters of child remains were discovered alongside those of attendants and animals. Unlike haphazard wartime casualties, these skeletons show no signs of trauma. Instead, their peaceful postures, some cradling small toys, others with hands clasped as if in prayer, suggest sedation before death, possibly from opium-laced milk. Nearby tablets describe offerings of the firstborn during crises like drought or invasion, when priests interpreted celestial omens as demands for the ultimate sacrifice. One heartbreaking inscription from Lagash reads, "For the anger of Enlil to be soothed, the seed of the king's house was given to the earth," but context is crucial. The Sumerians didn't view this as murder, but as the highest form of reciprocity. Their creation myth, the Eridu Genesis, tells of gods fashioning humans to bear their burdens, and in moments of existential threat, they believed returning that gift could restore balance. Droughts weren't just weather patterns, they were divine punishments for human failing. A child's life, being untainted by sin, was considered the purest currency to appease the gods. Some texts even describe sacrificed children becoming Ilu, divine messengers who could intercede for their families in the afterlife. Archaeology reveals disturbing nuances. High-status children were more commonly selected, their graves laden with treasures, gold bracelets, lapis amulets, even miniature chariots. This suggests sacrifice wasn't about disposing of unwanted offspring, but surrendering what was most precious. Chemical analyses of bones from Eridu show many victims were chronically ill, leading some scholars to argue these were mercy killings for children who wouldn't have survived infancy. Others point to skeletal evidence of congenital diseases, interpreting the practice as a brutal form of eugenics, eliminating those deemed unfit to perpetuate the bloodline. The ethical lines blur further when compared to neighboring cultures. While the Canaanites sacrificed children to Baal by fire, Sumerian methods were startlingly gentle: poison or suffocation rather than burning or dismemberment. Their hymns speak of priests singing the little ones to sleep in the arms of the gods, framing death as a sacred adoption rather than annihilation. Even the jars used in some burials resemble womb-like vessels, symbolizing rebirth into the divine realm. What unsettles modern observers most isn't just the acts themselves, but how seamlessly they coexisted with Sumer's brilliance. The same civilization that invented the wheel and calculus also rationalized taking innocent lives as divine math, a transaction where one death might save thousands. This duality forces a haunting question. How do we judge a culture that saw child sacrifice not as atrocity, but as the ultimate act of faith? The tiny bones of Ur offer no easy answers, only a reminder that humanity's light and shadow have always been intertwined even in civilization's cradle. Before the first seed was sown or the first furrow dug, Sumerian farmers turned their eyes upward not in prayer, but to read the stars with the precision of modern almanacs. Their agricultural calendar wasn't dictated by guesswork, but by celestial choreography so precise that modern scholars still marvel at its accuracy. When the Pleiades cluster vanished behind the spring horizon, it signaled the barley planting season. When Orion's belt tilted at a specific angle, the canals were open to flood the fields. This wasn't superstition, it was sky science, a sophisticated fusion of astronomy and survival honed over centuries of meticulous observation. The foundation of this system lay in the mul. A pin, a series of clay tablets that functioned as the Bronze Age farmer's almanac. These texts didn't just note star positions, they connected them directly to soil conditions. For example, when the constellation we call Taurus reached its zenith, tablets advised, "The earth drinks deep like a thirsty ox," a poetic cue that evaporation rates were low enough for optimal irrigation. Another passage links the heliacal rising of Sirius to the arrival of scorching wind of the south, warning farmers to harvest before their grain withered. The correlation between celestial and terrestrial events was so precise that some modern researchers have used these texts to reconstruct ancient climate patterns. What set Sumerian astro-agriculture apart was its institutional rigor. Temple astronomers known as Amanu maintained rooftop observatories, tracking planetary movements with water clocks and primitive quadrants. Their records were astonishingly detailed. Venus's cycles predicted rainfall, Mars's redness hinted at coming dust storms, and lunar eclipses were seen as urgent warnings to delay planting. One tablet from Nippur even records a priest chastising a village for ignoring a meteor shower omen, blaming their subsequent crop failure on turning their backs to the eyes of heaven. The system's brilliance lay in its adaptability. Unlike rigid solar calendars, Sumerian star-based timing adjusted naturally to seasonal shifts. During a series of unusually wet years, tablets show astronomers recalibrating planting dates by tracking slight delays in Arcturus's appearance, proof they understood celestial drift millennia before Ptolemy. Farmers weren't passive recipients of these decrees. Many owned cylinder seals depicting constellations, suggesting basic astronomical literacy across classes. Yet the stars guided more than just schedules. The Sumerians believed celestial bodies directly infused crops with vitality. Barley sown under Capricorn was thought to grow sturdier stalks, while dates harvested during Gemini's dominance were deemed sweeter. This wasn't mere folklore. Recent studies show lunar planting cycles can affect seed germination rates, lending eerie validity to some of their claims. Even their plowing rituals were timed to zodiacal phases, with oxen decorated in star symbols to pull down heavenly strength into the furrows. The legacy of this system echoes today in surprising ways. Modern farmers in Iraq's marshlands still refer to certain star alignments by their ancient Sumerian names when scheduling water releases, and the mul. Apin's star maps were so accurate that NASA used them to study historical supernova sightings. The Sumerians may not have understood gravity or light years, but their empirical sky wisdom reveals a profound truth: that civilization's first bread was baked not just from earth and water, but from the silent, glittering language of the cosmos above. The Sumerians took hair removal to artistic extremes, not with modern razors or wax, but with seashell tweezers, volcanic pumice stones, and even early versions of sugaring paste made from dates and resin. These weren't just grooming habits, they were rituals steeped in symbolism, where a hairless body marked the boundary between civilization and wilderness, purity and impurity. For both men and women, the absence of body hair signaled refinement, divinity, and social rank, turning what we might consider a mundane chore into a sacred act with cosmic consequences. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of delicate shell tweezers in graves and household ruins, some still clutched in skeletal hands. The most prized were carved from mother of pearl, their edges honed to microscopic precision, a testament to Sumerian craftsmanship. But shell wasn't the only tool. Temple reliefs show women rubbing their skin with abrasive sandstones imported from distant quarries, a practice akin to dry exfoliation that left the skin smooth but raw. Medical tablets even prescribe a hair-dissolving paste of crushed bird bones and alkali ash, warning users to avoid sunlight for days afterward to prevent the burning wrath of Utu, the sun god. The cultural weight behind these practices becomes clear in Sumerian art. Deities are always depicted hairless except for their elaborate wigs and beards, their polished skins shimmering like polished bronze. To mimic this divine aesthetic, priests and priestesses underwent full-body depilation before major rituals, believing body hair trapped dark spirits that could corrupt sacred spaces. Even the legendary hero Gilgamesh is described in one tablet as smooth as a river stone before entering the cedar forest, as if hairlessness granted him supernatural courage. But the most startling revelation comes from legal texts. A law from Ur penalizes adulterers by publicly shaving their heads and bodies, a punishment meant to strip them of both dignity and spiritual protection. Conversely, contracts for temple servants specify monthly hair removal allowances, framing smooth skin as a professional requirement. This duality reveals a society where hair wasn't just a personal choice, it was a ledger of morality and status etched directly onto the flesh. What fascinates modern researchers is the ingenuity behind their methods. While Egyptian hair removal relied largely on sharpened flint, Sumerians pioneered early chemical depilatories using a mixture of quicklime and water, a recipe so caustic it resurged in Roman baths millennia later. Wealthy nobles employed hair chanters, specialists who sang incantations to Nisaba, goddess of writing, while plucking each follicle, turning the painful process into a spiritual liturgy. Yet for all its cultural significance, Sumerian hair removal wasn't without risks. Medical tablets detail infections from rusty tools, chemical burns, and even cases where overzealous plucking triggered the falling sickness, likely an ancient reference to seizures caused by nerve damage. This dark underbelly reminds us that their pursuit of divinity came at a price, one paid in blood, pain, and sometimes even life itself. In the end, these rituals force us to reconsider our own beauty standards. When we reach for a razor or wax strip today, we're participating in a tradition far older than fashion magazines or advertising a tradition that began with shell tweezers and the unshakable belief that to be hairless was to touch the realm of the gods. The Sumerians simply took that belief to its most visceral extreme, turning their bodies into canvases where every plucked hair was a stroke of devotion. Walking through the marshes of southern Mesopotamia, you wouldn't have seen Sumerians draped in wool or linen alone. Some of the most skilled among them wore clothing crafted from the skins of fish. This wasn't a last resort for the impoverished, but a deliberate and sophisticated practice blending survival, symbolism, and artistry. The scaly hides of giant carp and catfish, carefully tanned and stitched, became waterproof cloaks, durable shoes, and even ceremonial garb, turning what might seem like a bizarre choice into a stroke of ingenuity. The process began with selecting the right fish, massive specimens from the Tigris and Euphrates, some stretching longer than a man's arm. After cleaning, the skins were soaked in a mixture of date palm ash and river water to loosen the scales, then stretched over wooden frames to dry. The real innovation came in the tanning. Sumerian artisans rubbed the hides with a blend of fish oil and tannin-rich acacia bark, a method that preserved flexibility while neutralizing the pungent odor. The result was a material as sturdy as leather but far lighter, perfect for the region's sweltering humidity. beyond practicality, fish skin clothing carried deep spiritual meaning. Texts from Eridu describe priests wearing fish-scale tunics during water rituals, believing the material channeled the wisdom of Enki, the god of freshwater and wisdom, who was often depicted with a flowing fish-like cloak. Ordinary fishermen donned fish-skin aprons as talismans against drowning, their iridescent surfaces thought to confuse malevolent water spirits. Even the pharaohs of Egypt received gifts of Sumerian fish-skin armor, prized for its exotic sheen and rumored invulnerability to arrows, a myth likely born from the material's surprising resistance to punctures. The symbolism extended to social hierarchy. While commoners wore simple fish-skin sandals or work gloves, elites flaunted intricately patterned robes with scales arranged in geometric motifs, each design signaling clan affiliation or royal favor. One surviving garment from features gilded scales sewn in spirals, mimicking the constellation Pisces, a celestial nod to the belief that wearers carried the favor of heaven. Yet this practice wasn't without its challenges. Medical tablets complain of the itch of the fish, a persistent rash caused by microscopic scale fragments irritating the skin. And during droughts, when rivers receded and large fish grew scarce, fish skin became a luxury item, its scarcity fueling black markets where a single pair of gloves could trade for a month's worth of barley. What makes the Sumerians' use of fish skin so remarkable is how it reflects their resourcefulness. Where others saw food waste, they saw potential, transforming a byproduct of survival into something both functional and sacred. In a civilization that revered water as the source of life, wrapping oneself in the river's bounty was more than practical. It was an act of devotion, a way to carry the essence of the gods against one's skin. Today, as modern designers experiment with sustainable fish leather, we're finally catching up to an idea that flowed through Sumer's waterways 5,000 years ago. When illness struck in ancient Sumer, physicians might prescribe a remedy that would make modern patients recoil: a poultice of fermented human dung, carefully aged and mixed with honey or beer. Far from a desperate last resort, these fecal treatments were a cornerstone of Sumerian medicine, backed by scrolls of cuneiform tablets detailing precise recipes and rituals. What sounds like sheer madness to us was for them a perfectly rational approach to healing, one that modern science is now discovering might have held unexpected wisdom beneath the revolting surface. The process began with meticulous collection. Unlike animal waste, which was deemed too impure for medical use, human excrement from healthy individuals, particularly infants or temple priests, was gathered in ceramic jars and left to ferment for months under the sun. This aging wasn't just about reducing odor. Sumerian texts describe how putrefaction unlocked the hidden spirits of healing, transforming waste into what they called black honey. The resulting paste was then blended with ingredients like goat's milk, crushed garlic, or juniper berries, creating ointments for wounds, suppositories for internal ailments, or even inhalants for respiratory diseases. But why? The Sumerians saw excrement through a lens of symbolic potency. Just as dung fertilized crops, they believed it could fertilize the body's ability to heal, restoring balance like rich soil nourishing a withered plant. Medical tablets from Nippur describe intestinal parasites being treated with enemas containing trace amounts of fecal matter, a startling parallel to modern fecal microbiota transplants used to combat C. difficile infections. Other texts prescribe dung poultices for abscesses, claiming the treatment drew out corruption, much like pus from a wound. The logic went deeper than symbolism. Temple physicians observed that wounds treated with dung healed faster, likely because fermentation fostered antibiotic-producing bacteria similar to penicillin. One remarkable prescription from details a postpartum infection remedy combining aged feces with wine and myrrh, a blend that modern tests show has mild antibacterial properties. Even their use of infant stool hints at intuitive understanding of probiotics. We now know breastfed babies' gut bacteria can aid digestion in adults. Of course, the risks were profound. Parasites, deadly infections, and septicemia lurked in every application. Yet the Sumerians mitigated these dangers through rigorous protocols, sterilizing tools with boiling water, selecting donors from pure households, and always pairing fecal treatments with incantations to Gula, the healing goddess who purified all that is rotten. What fascinates most is how this practice forces us to reconsider the boundaries between ancient and modern medicine. For millennia, we dismissed these remedies as mere superstition. Now, as scientists explore the gut microbiome's role in immunity and mental health, the Sumerians' reverence for human waste seems less bizarre and more like an eerie premonition of microbial science. Their black honey might have been medicine's first crude antibiotic, a reminder that sometimes wisdom comes wrapped in the most unlikely packages. When death visited a Sumerian household, grief wasn't a private affair. It erupted into the streets in a cacophony of wails, torn garments, and self-inflicted wounds. Public mourning wasn't just an emotional response, it was a civic duty, a performance of sorrow so codified that tablets detail everything from the angle of torn clothing to the acceptable depth of fingernail gashes on cheeks. To modern eyes, these rituals might seem performative or excessive, but to the Sumerians, they were essential, a way to measure the weight of a life lost and ensure the deceased's safe passage to the underworld. The process began the moment breath left the body. Professional mourners, called lamentation singers, would arrive at the home, their hair streaked with ashes and their robes rent diagonally from shoulder to waist, a deliberate tear believed to mirror the veil between worlds. These weren't mere hired weepers, they were trained vocalists who mastered specific scales and rhythms said to soothe restless spirits. Their dirges, preserved on clay tablets, blended poetry with primal cries, recounting the deceased's virtues while also accusing the gods of cruelty. One surviving lament from captures this duality. "O Ereshkigal, queen of the dark below, why have you bitten this one like a reed, leaving only hollow echoes where laughter once lived?" But the family's role was far from passive. Close relatives, especially women, were expected to escalate the display. They'd dishevel their hair, rub dirt into their scalp, and scratch their faces until blood trickled in thin rivulets. Legal texts from Lagash find households that failed to demonstrate sufficient laceration, suggesting grief had to be visible to be valid. Even children participated, their tiny hands clutching ritual blades to make shallow cuts on their arms, not enough to maim, but sufficient to leave scars as permanent memorials. What makes these customs particularly striking is their gendered dimension. While men could express grief through solemn silences or tearing their beards, women bore the brunt of public mourning. Wall reliefs show mothers and daughters collapsing dramatically over biers, their bodies contorted in postures so exaggerated they border on theatrical. This wasn't arbitrary. Sumerians believed women's voices carried unique power to navigate the liminal space between life and death. Their screams were thought to guide the soul while simultaneously warding off demons eager to claim the newly departed. Archaeological evidence reveals how deeply these rituals permeated society. Graves often contained small bronze razors and pots of ochre pigment, tools for self-mutilation and marking the body with symbolic wounds. Some skeletons show healed parallel cuts on forearms, suggesting recurring participation in mourning rites. But the most haunting finds are clay, groaning figurines, statuettes depicting mourners with mouths frozen in eternal screams, buried as substitutes to continue lamenting for eternity when human voices grew hoarse. Yet beneath the spectacle lay profound social mechanics. Public mourning functioned as an early form of grief therapy, channeling individual pain into collective catharsis. It also served as a leveling force. When a beggar and a merchant died side by side in a plague, their funerals might look strikingly similar, with the same prescribed cries and gashes. In a civilization obsessed with hierarchy, death became the great equalizer, if only for the duration of a ritual. the legacy of these practices lingers in unexpected ways. Modern Shia Muslim mourning processions in Iraq, with their chest-beating and rhythmic wailing, echo ancient Sumerian traditions passed down through millennia. Even our own instinct to wear black or gather for wakes stems from this primal need to ritualize loss. The Sumerians simply took it further, treating grief not as something to hide, but as a visible, almost sacred disruption, a temporary unraveling of society's fabric so the dead wouldn't have to journey alone. In the shadow of every ziggurat, a bustling economy thrived, one where farmers hauled sacks of barley, craftsmen presented finely woven textiles, and merchants weighed out precious metals, all to fulfill their sacred duty. This was the temple tax, a system so deeply woven into Sumerian society that skipping a payment wasn't just a civic offense, it was an act of defiance against the gods themselves. Unlike modern taxes flowing to government coffers, these contributions went directly to the temples, funding everything from priestly robes to the construction of monumental stairways to heaven. The system operated with remarkable precision. Each citizen's obligation was calculated based on their harvest, trade, or craft. A farmer might owe 1/10 of his barley yield, while a metalsmith handed over a portion of his bronze tools. Even laborers without goods to give paid in sweat, spending weeks each year dredging canals or repairing temple walls. Records from Lagash detail how officials used clay tokens to track these payments, different shapes representing sheep, grain, or days of service stored in hollow bulli that functioned as Bronze Age receipts. One particularly vivid tablet from lists a widow's plea to pay half her tax in wool and half in mourning songs for the temple choir, proving the system could accommodate even the most unconventional offerings. Enforcement was both practical and supernatural. Inspectors with measuring rods would audit granaries, but the real deterrent was spiritual. Tax evaders weren't just fined, they were cursed in public ceremonies, their names inscribed on tablets buried beneath temple thresholds so the gods would trample their fortunes into dust. Legal texts describe delinquents being barred from temple rites, effectively cutting them off from divine protection in a world where that could mean crop failure or demonic attack. A striking case from Nippur recounts a merchant who hid his best lapis lazuli. When his ship later sank in a freak storm, priests declared it the wrath of Enki, making him a cautionary tale for generations. What's fascinating is how these taxes sustained more than just religion. Temple warehouses became Mesopotamia's first banks, redistributing surplus grain during famines. The famed House of the Dates in York used tax revenue to fund public festivals where even the poorest received honey cakes and beer. And when foreign emissaries visited, it was temple stores that provisioned lavish gifts of perfumed oil and gold, diplomacy funded by communal devotion. Yet the system wasn't without tension. Tablets from the reign of Urukagina reveal reforms to prevent priests from overtaxing the vulnerable, suggesting even divinely sanctioned systems could breed corruption. Some households buried small, decoy stashes of inferior goods, keeping their best harvest hidden, a Bronze Age version of creative accounting. And when empires like Akkad absorbed Sumerian cities, the delicate balance collapsed as conquerors diverted temple wealth to palaces, sparking rebellions in the name of restoring the gods' rightful share. The legacy of these practices echoes in unexpected places. Modern tithes and even property taxes trace conceptual roots to Sumer's blend of civic and sacred duty. But perhaps their most enduring lesson lies in the receipts themselves, thousands of fired clay tokens preserving the names of long-dead farmers and artisans. These weren't just financial records, they were proof that every citizen, from the humblest potter to the wealthiest merchant, played a part in building something greater than themselves. The ziggurats may have crumbled, but the idea they embodied, that society thrives when all contribute, still stands as solid as those ancient temple walls. The gleaming blade hovering over the patient's flesh wasn't steel. It was copper, meticulously honed to a razor's edge by Sumerian surgeons 5,000 years before modern antiseptics. In the world's first known medical procedures, these pioneers didn't just guess their way through healing. They wielded copper tools with astonishing precision, stitching wounds, draining abscesses, and even performing rudimentary cataract surgeries. Their techniques, recorded on clay tablets now housed in museums, reveal a medical sophistication that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Copper wasn't chosen by accident. The Sumerians observed its unique properties, how it seemed to resist fouling, how wounds treated with copper tools healed cleaner. We now know why. Copper ions destroy bacteria and viruses on contact, making these tools the Bronze Age equivalent of sterilized equipment. Temple medical texts from Lagash describe procedures where surgeons would rub copper scalpels with garlic and vinegar, an early attempt at supercharging the metal's antimicrobial effects. One remarkable prescription tablet details a compound fracture treatment. After aligning the bones with copper rods, the wound was packed with a paste of ground malachite, a copper ore, and honey, creating what we'd now recognize as an antibiotic dressing. The procedures themselves were shockingly advanced. Cuneiform tablets from Nippur's medical archive describe trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to relieve pressure, with copper borers that had different tip sizes for precise bone removal. Eye surgery texts instruct physicians to use curved copper needles to scrape away the veil of darkness, likely cataracts, while other records mention copper drainage tubes inserted into infected wounds. What's staggering is their success rate. Skeletal remains show bone growth around surgical sites, proving many patients survived these interventions. One skull from even displays trepanation marks with clear healing evidence the patient lived years afterward. But Sumerian surgery wasn't just mechanical. It was spiritual theater. Before any procedure, surgeons would purify their copper tools by passing them through incense smoke while chanting prayers to Gula, the healing goddess. Patients were given opium-laced beer, not just as anesthesia but to open the gates of divine vision. The operating space, often a temple courtyard, was scoured with salt and natron, creating a sterile zone centuries before germ theory. Even the copper itself held symbolic meaning. Its reddish hue mirrored divine blood, turning each incision into a sacred act of channeling heavenly power into earthly flesh. The legacy of these innovations stretches far beyond Mesopotamia. Egyptian medical papyri later adopted Sumerian copper techniques, and Greek physicians like Hippocrates praised the red metal's healing touch. Modern hospitals are rediscovering copper's power too, replacing stainless steel doorknobs with copper alloys to reduce infections. Yet perhaps the most profound lesson lies in how the Sumerians blended observation and mysticism. They didn't just use copper because it worked, they revered it as a gift from Enki, the god of wisdom. In their world, science and spirituality weren't opposites, they were two sides of the same scalpel, each cut a prayer written in flesh and metal. When darkness fell over Sumer and unsettling whispers filled the night air, families didn't call for guards or physicians, they summoned the mashmashu, the dreaded exorcist priests who specialized in combating the invisible plague of demonic possession. Armed with copper daggers, clay figurines, and an arsenal of chilling incantations, these specialists waged spiritual warfare against entities like the Alu, a shadow creature that suffocated sleepers, or the Galu, who dragged victims to the underworld. Their rituals weren't mere theatrics but meticulously documented procedures that blended psychology, theatrics, and what we might now call early neuroscience. The ceremony began with diagnosis. A possessed person might display symptoms we'd associate with epilepsy, seizures, foaming at the mouth, or speaking in tongues, but to the Sumerians, these were clear signs of demonic occupation. The priest would first burn a mix of sulfur and juniper berries, watching how the smoke curled around the patient. A spiral pattern indicated Utuku spirits, while jagged movements signaled the more dangerous Rabisu. Next came the water test, where a clay cup filled from the Euphrates was placed on the victim's head. Rapid evaporation meant evil presence, as demons were believed to boil water with their infernal heat. Only then came the exorcism proper. The priest would don a tunic stitched with 101 knots, each representing a binding spell, and circle the patient while shaking a bronze rattle called a sistrum, its jangling tones designed to shatter demonic ears. The key weapon was the incantation, not just spoken but performed. One surviving tablet from Nippur details the exorcism of the seven, where the priest would spit 7 times, stamp 7 times, and recite, "By heaven be exorcised. By earth be exorcised, 7 are they, 7 are they, in the ocean deep, 7 are they, battening in heaven, 7 are they." Each line was punctuated by physical actions, tying and untying cords to metaphorically bind the demon, or pressing a baked clay amulet against the patient's forehead to absorb the evil. Some rituals required shocking sensory overload, sudden blasts of trumpets, blinding flashes of polished bronze mirrors reflecting sunlight, or the stench of burning goat hair, a smell so pungent it was thought to repel spirits. The tools of this trade reveal startling ingenuity. Excavations at Eridu unearthed a demon trap, a hollow clay sphere filled with honey and buried beneath thresholds. Spirits drawn to sweetness would become stuck like insects in amber. Other finds include lamashtu amulets depicting grotesque figures bound in chains, their mouths gagged with bitumen. Some exorcism kits contained actual medical implements. A copper lance, it might first draw blood from a patient's ear to release trapped demons, then be used to lance an infected wound. This blurring of spiritual and physical healing suggests the Mashmashu understood, in their way, that mind and body were connected. What's most fascinating is how these rituals evolved based on failure. Tablet archives show case studies where initial exorcisms didn't take, the demon returned, or new symptoms emerged. Subsequent versions added layers. Figurines of the demon were now drowned in sacred pools instead of just buried, or the incantations grew longer with added deity names. One protocol was revised 12 times over 2 centuries, becoming increasingly elaborate, like a spiritual arms race against ever smarter demons. Modern parallels are unavoidable. The rhythmic chanting resembles cognitive behavioral therapy's exposure techniques. The sensory overload mirrors shock treatments, and the figurines functioned as primitive symbolic therapy. Whether these rituals worked depends on perspective. Few demons were actually seen fleeing, but for a culture that viewed mental illness as supernatural assault, the sheer theatricality provided a framework for healing. When every seizure or psychotic episode was a battle between cosmic forces, having a script copper dagger in hand, God's names on your lips, made the terrifying manageable, the chaotic ordered. That may have been the real magic all along. Around every Sumerian neck, wrist, or ankle, sometimes hidden beneath clothing, sometimes displayed proudly, hung tiny powerhouses of divine protection, amulets. These weren't mere ornaments but lifelines against an invisible world of threats, crafted from materials believed to pulse with supernatural energy. From lapis lazuli scarabs guarding against poison to crescent-shaped copper charms warding off demonic possession, these objects formed an intimate armor against the chaos lurking beyond human control. The choice of material was never arbitrary. Lapis lazuli, imported from distant Afghanistan, was prized not just for its vivid blue hue, but because its flecks of golden pyrite mirrored the night sky, making it a conduit for celestial power. Carnelian's blood-red glow symbolized life force, ideal for amulets protecting mothers during childbirth. Even humble clay transformed into sacred objects when pressed with cylinder seals depicting deities or inscribed with cuneiform spells. One particularly potent amulet found in Ur contained a sliver of meteorite iron, a literal piece of the heavens meant to repel underworld spirits. Symbols carried layered meanings. The ubiquitous Udug demon mask amulet didn't just scare evil spirits. Its grotesque features were a mirror reflecting malice back at its source. Fish-shaped pendants invoked Enki's wisdom, while twisted core designs mimicked the ropes used to tether chaos in creation myths. Some of the most powerful amulets combined multiple symbols: a sun disk for Shamash's justice, a scorpion for Ishtar's ferocity, and a tamarisk twig for durability, all fused into a single palm-sized disk. But these talismans demanded activation. A newly crafted amulet wasn't just worn, it underwent consecration rituals where priests bathed it in moonlight, anointed it with sacred oils, or even fed it drops of beer and honey. Tablet instructions from Nippur describe attaching amulets to patients while chanting. Let this be the tooth that bites the biting demon, the thorn that pricks the grasping hand of darkness. Some were designed for specific crises. Childbirth amulets were buried after use, trapping any intercepted curses underground, while battlefield charms shattered deliberately upon impact, their breaking releasing protective spirits. Archaeology reveals how deeply these beliefs permeated daily life. Excavated homes often had amulets buried beneath doorways, and cylinder seals show even kings wearing multiple charms during court sessions. Medical texts prescribe amulets as standard treatment. One prescription for fever directs wrapping a lapis lazuli frog amulet in linen and tying it around the neck so its cooling power could seep into the body. The sheer variety is staggering. Bronze hands gesturing to ward off evil, tiny clay beds to prevent nightmares, even miniature ladders to help souls ascend if death came unexpectedly. What's most striking is how these practices blurred the line between medicine and magic. While modern science scoffs at the idea of carved stones curing disease, studies show lapis lazuli does harbor trace amounts of antibacterial sulfur, and copper amulets could have genuinely prevented infections. The placebo effect likely played a role too. A mother clutching a carnelian birth amulet probably experienced reduced stress, indirectly easing labor. The Sumerians wouldn't have separated these explanations. To them, the physical and spiritual were threads of the same protective fabric. The legacy of these amulets whispers to us still. The evil eye pendants of the Mediterranean, the Hamsa hands of the Middle East, even modern hospital wristbands, all descend from Sumer's belief that danger could be held at bay by objects charged with meaning. In a world where threats feel increasingly abstract, their tiny charms remind us that humans have always sought tangible ways to face the invisible terrors gnawing at the edges of existence. Whether stone, metal, or baked clay, these amulets were more than superstition. They were pocket-sized testaments to the enduring need for something to hold onto when the darkness feels too close. When a Sumerian woman went into labor, her attendants didn't reach for herbs or clean cloths first. They brought beer, thick, unfiltered, and often laced with honey or date syrup. This potent brew wasn't for celebration but function, a sacred analgesic that blurred the line between medicine and ritual. Temple texts from Nippur describe midwives carefully measuring out beer in special ceramic vessels shaped like the fertility goddess Ninhursag, ensuring each sip delivered both physical relief and divine blessing. The science behind this practice is startlingly sound. Sumerian beer, rich in barley and often lightly fermented, contained three key elements that aided childbirth: natural sugars for energy, alcohol to dull pain, and yeast-loaded sediment packed with B vitamins to prevent hemorrhage. Modern studies show that moderate alcohol consumption can relax pelvic muscles, potentially easing delivery, while the electrolytes in ancient beer's cloudy dregs helped prevent dehydration, a deadly risk in prolonged labor. One medical tablet from Even specifies a two-part regimen: a light first-stage beer with lower alcohol content to maintain alertness, followed by a stronger, pushing beer during transition, dosed like an ancient epidural. But beer's role extended far beyond chemistry. In a society where Inanna's descent to the underworld was metaphor for childbirth's perilous journey, alcohol became a sacred conduit. Laboring women drank from cups inscribed with protective spells, each swallow symbolically aligning them with the goddess who'd triumphed over death. The foam topping the brew held particular significance. Its bubbling effervescence mirrored the rising life force needed to propel the baby forth. Some texts describe midwives blowing into the beer before offering it, a ritual exhalation believed to transfer courage from the divine realm. Archaeology reveals this practice's intimacy. Excavated birth houses contained specialized strainers to remove large grain holes, ensuring smooth consumption during contractions. At Mari, a fresco shows a kneeling woman clutching a beer jug while a midwife supports her back, the scene so visceral you can almost hear the groans and sloshing liquid. Most poignant are the tiny terracotta birth amulets found in Holmes' miniature beer jugs with openings just wide enough for a newborn's finger, ensuring the child's first symbolic drink connected them to this life-giving ritual. Not all births followed this script. Temple records note exceptions for priestesses of Ninkasi, the beer goddess, who abstained to honor their patron deity, using hypnotic chanting instead. Poorer women might receive beer cut with water or date wine substitutes, and when complications arose, the beer's roll shifted poured over sharp obsidian blades before emergency perineal cuts, its alcohol content serving as crude antiseptic. What seems like reckless intoxication today was, in its context, sophisticated obstetrics. The Sumerians observed that beer-assisted births had higher survival rates, though they attributed this to divine favor rather than muscle relaxation or caloric intake. Their innovation lives on in unexpected ways. Modern maternity wards still use glucose drips for energy, epidurals for pain, and pitocin derived from barley mold to induce labor. The only difference, our medicines come in sterile vials instead of clay jugs, their sacred origins forgotten but their purpose unchanged, to turn the agony of birth into something survivable, one measured sip at a time. At the break of dawn, the temple courtyards of Sumer echoed not with hymns, but with the panicked bleating of goats and the lowing of cattle, a symphony of fear heralding one of civilization's most enduring rituals. Animal sacrifice wasn't just an occasional offering to the Sumerians, it was the lifeblood of their relationship with the divine, a daily transaction where blood flowed like currency and smoke carried prayers to impatient gods. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A poorly executed sacrifice might mean drought, plague, or worse, the gods turning their backs entirely. Not just any creature would suffice. White sheep were favored for Enlil, the storm god, their unblemished fleece mirroring his sacred clouds. Black goats were reserved for Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, their dark hides symbolizing the void she ruled. Doves fluttered skyward for Inanna, their wings mimicking her ascent from the underworld, while bulls massive, costly, were slaughtered only for city-wide crises, their sheer size meant to match the magnitude of the plea. Even fish had their role, gutted alive before statues of Enki to ensure river floods stayed generous. The choice of animal was a precise language, each species a word in a visceral dialogue with the divine. The methods were equally codified. A priest's knife wasn't merely sharp, it was consecrated with lunar incantations, its copper blade inscribed with the cusp of the new moon, symbolizing rebirth. The instant of death mattered profoundly. A quick, clean cut ensured the animal's spirit rose intact to the gods, while a botched stroke signaled divine displeasure. One tablet from Nippur records a failed sacrifice where the sheep kicked twice before stillness, an omen so dire the entire ritual had to be repeated with 3 animals to atone. But the true shock lies in what came after. Unlike later cultures that burned entire offerings, the Sumerians practiced pragmatic divinity. Only select portions, the fatty liver, the thigh bones, were burnt for the gods. The rest became a sacred barbecue, divided between priests, the poor, and even the sacrificer's family. In a society where meat was a luxury, sacrifice doubled as divinely sanctioned redistribution, turning temples into the world's first soup kitchens. The intended outcomes ranged from practical to cosmic. a merchant might sacrifice a lamb to ensure safe travels, its entrails examined for favorable ridges. Kings offered entire herds before war, interpreting the animal's final spasms as battlefield prophecies. Most haunting were the substitute king rituals, where a donkey wearing a crown was slaughtered to absorb a monarch's predicted doom, a scapegoat tradition that later evolved into human proxy sacrifices under the Assyrians. Yet beneath the gore, these rituals reveal a profound intimacy with mortality. The Sumerians didn't shield themselves from death's reality. They stared into its eyes daily, believing that only by acknowledging life's fragility could they truly commune with the forces sustaining it. When we flinch at their practices, we ignore how our own supermarkets package meat in sterile plastic, obscuring the same bloodshed they honored openly. Their sacrifices were more than superstition. They were reminders that every meal, every harvest, every breath came at a cost, paid in blood to powers far older than civilization itself. The skin of a Sumerian wasn't just flesh. It was a living tapestry of divine armor, etched with symbols meant to repel demons, cure disease, and even guide the soul through the underworld. Unlike modern tattoos chosen for aesthetics, these permanent markings were a matter of survival, a spiritual shield crafted from soot, ochre, and sacred ink. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of tattooing tools in earth-sharpened bronze needles, clay pots stained with pigment mixtures, and even preserved skin fragments bearing faint geometric designs. But these weren't idle decorations. Each line, dot, and curve held power, turning the human body into a battleground against unseen forces. The process itself was a ritual as precise as temple sacrifice. A priest tattooist, often a devotee of the healing goddess Gula, would begin by purifying the skin with a paste of natron and juniper smoke. The designs, predetermined by celestial omens or dream visions, were then sketched in henna before the needle's bite. Unlike today's electric tattoo guns, Sumerian artists used a handheld bone or bronze tool to puncture the skin, rubbing in a paste of charred frankincense resin and crushed lapis lazuli. The blue-black ink wasn't chosen for its hue alone. Lapis was believed to carry the voice of the gods, its flecks of golden pyrite mirroring the night sky's protective gaze. Certain motifs recurred like sacred mantras. Concentric circles on the wrists warded off the hand of ghosts, a malady thought to cause tremors. Parallel lines down the spine channeled the strength of the world tree, while tiny scorpions tattooed near the navel guarded against poison, both literal and supernatural. Women often bore zigzagging waves along their hips, invoking the primal waters of creation to ease childbirth. But the most potent designs were hidden, spiral patterns behind the ears to confuse whispering demons, or the cuneiform symbol for light on the soles of the feet, ensuring one could always find the path back from the underworld. Spiritual preparation was as crucial as the physical act. Recipients fasted for 3 days, drinking only sesame oil to thin the veil between worlds. The tattooing session coincided with planetary alignments. Venus crescents were inked only when Ishtar's star dominated the evening sky. Pain wasn't an unfortunate side effect. It was sacred currency, the body's blood offering to activate the symbols. One incantation tablet instructs the priest to chant as the needle pierced. Let this mark be a door the wicked cannot enter, a flame the shadow cannot cross. The potency of these tattoos extended beyond life. Mortuary texts describe the judges of the underworld, recognizing initiates by their skin markings, granting swifter passage to paradise. Some mummified remains show tattoos strategically placed over organs, a sun disk over the heart to retain warmth in the afterlife, or falcon wings spanning the shoulders to facilitate the soul's flight. Even in death, the body remained armored. What modern minds might dismiss as superstition reveals a profound worldview. For the Sumerians, the skin wasn't a boundary but a permeable membrane, vulnerable to spiritual invasion. Tattoos fortified this frontier, merging the physical and metaphysical in a way few cultures have replicated. Today, as scientists discover how tattoo ink interacts with the immune system, literally becoming part of our biological defense network, we're only beginning to grasp what these ancient practitioners intuited, that the body's canvas, when inscribed with intention, can be more than flesh. It can be a fortress. Before the discovery of antibiotics, before germ theory, even before the concept of bacteria existed, the Sumerians wielded a gleaming weapon against infection: silver. Not as jewelry or currency, but as medicine. Their medical tablets describe intricate protocols where silver flakes were stirred into water jars, wound dressings were impregnated with powdered silver, and surgical tools were inlaid with silver patterns, not for decoration, but because they somehow knew this shimmering metal fought the invisible forces of decay. What seems like mystical intuition today turns out to have startling scientific validity. The Sumerians' silver purification techniques were astonishingly precise. Water storage vessels found in and Lagash contain interior linings of beaten silver foil, engineered to maximize surface area contact. Texts prescribe suspending silver ingots in wells during plague seasons, noting how families doing so suffered fewer deaths. For wound care, physicians ground silver into dust using basalt mortars, then mixed it with honey and rendered fat to create antibacterial salves. One remarkable formula from a Nippur medical tablet details a burn treatment combining silver powder with aloe and crushed willow bark, a triple-threat remedy that modern studies confirm has anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, and analgesic properties. What's truly baffling is how they connected silver's effects to spiritual concepts. Without microscopes, they described silver's power as the hand of Shamash burning away darkness, visualizing infection as demonic invasion. Their purification rituals involved placing silver objects under moonlight, believing lunar rays amplified its healing properties, an eerie parallel to how modern science shows UV light enhances silver's ionization. They even categorized wounds by which metals to use: copper for simple cuts, gold for internal ailments, but silver for festering injuries that smelled of the underworld's breath, likely gangrene. The clinical results speak for themselves. Analysis of skeletons from Sumerian surgical sites shows lower infection rates than medieval European remains, despite occurring millennia earlier. Researchers testing replica silver-lined vessels found they killed cholera and E. coli within hours, matching tablets boasting how the shining metal makes river water safe by dusk. Most remarkably, their wound salves retained antimicrobial potency when recreated in labs. One prescription for pus-filled ulcers proved effective against modern antibiotic-resistant MRSA. This wasn't blind luck. The Sumerians systematically refined their methods over centuries. Early texts simply mention silver dust, while later versions specify particle size and purity grades. They discovered silver worked best when combined with certain acids, vinegar, or fermented grain water, that we now know help release silver ions. One advanced technique involved electroplating needles with silver by submerging them in wine alongside silver ingots, exploiting the liquid's natural electrolytic properties centuries before the concept of electricity existed. In temple pharmacies, silver took on sacred dimensions. High priests stored it in rooms aligned to Venus's movements, believing the planet's metallic association enhanced potency. Medical incantations invoked the metal's celestial origins. Born from the furnace of the stars, let this silver devour what devours my flesh. This spiritual framing ensured silver's use remained rigorously controlled, not due to cost, but because it was considered divine technology. Ordinary citizens might receive silver-treated bandages, but only temples housed the thick folios detailing its most advanced applications. The legacy of these practices stretches into modern hospitals, where silver-lined catheters and silver-infused dressings now combat resistant superbugs, a cutting-edge solution, rediscovering what the Sumerians documented on clay tablets 5,000 years ago. Their understanding may have been framed in mysticism rather than microbiology, but their empirical results prove something extraordinary: that humanity's first civilization didn't just stumble upon silver's healing properties, they mastered them. In an age before science, they turned a metal we associate with jewelry into one of history's first systematic weapons against the invisible killers lurking in water and wounds. For 12 thunderous days each spring, the cities of Sumer erupted into a spectacle of chaos and renewal, the Akitu festival. This wasn't just a celebration of the new year, it was a cosmic reset button, a ritual reenactment of creation itself where the entire social order trembled before being triumphantly restored. At its heart lay a startling truth. The Sumerians believed their world didn't merely turn forward with the seasons, it had to be violently dismantled and remade through human hands. The festival's opening act set the tone for this sacred upheaval. On the first day, the high priest of Enlil, king of the gods, entered the temple and shattered a clay tablet inscribed with the previous year's laws and decrees. This wasn't symbolic theater. Actual legal contracts were suspended, debts erased, and prisoners pardoned as the ordinary rules of society dissolved. For commoners, it meant a fleeting taste of anarchy. Grain stores were opened, and hierarchies inverted in raucous street festivals where slaves mocked masters and children issued orders to parents. Tablet fragments from Nippur describe bakeries distributing cakes shaped like shackles, eaten in a ritualized devouring of oppression symbols. But the true drama unfolded on the fourth day, when the city's god statue, usually confined to its temple, was paraded through the streets in a lavishly decorated barge. Crowds lined the processional route, pelting the divine effigy with insults and rotten fruit, a shocking act of lese majesty meant to provoke the deity's rage. This wasn't irreverence, it was spiritual combustion, stirring the gods to action through calculated disrespect. The statue was then imprisoned in a special shrine outside the city walls, where priests performed daily rituals to weaken it, removing its jewelry, shrouding its face, and even withholding its usual food offerings. The tension peaked on the 8th day with the reading of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic borrowed from Sumerian traditions. As priests chanted the story of Marduk slaying the chaos monster Tiamat, actors wielding copper swords reenacted the battle in the streets, their clashes timed to celestial events. If Venus appeared particularly bright that night, it signaled the gods' approval. If clouds obscured the stars, the city held its breath, fearing disaster. Only then came catharsis. On the 11th day, the king, stripped of his regalia, crawled on his knees before the humiliated god statue, confessing his failures and swearing renewed devotion. In a ritual that would make modern politicians blanch, the high priest slapped the monarch hard enough to draw tears, a visceral reminder that royal power flowed from divine sufferance. The struck cheek became a badge of honor. Kings boasted of their Akitu slaps in inscriptions, proof they'd endured the ultimate test of legitimacy. The finale transformed chaos into order. The god statue was triumphantly returned to its temple amid a riot of music and flowers, its jewelry restored with additions crafted from the people's offerings. The king, now reinvested with authority, enacted his first decree, usually a populist move like tax relief or temple repairs, while priests distributed fortune tablets, baked clay amulets predicting the year's blessings. Farmers timed their plantings to Akitu's conclusion, believing the reconsecrated world made seeds more fertile. Even the stars were thought to realign, their positions reinterpreted by astronomers to guide the reborn society. What makes Akitu so revelatory isn't just its scale, it's the psychological genius beneath the spectacle. By institutionalizing controlled anarchy, the Sumerians vented social pressures that might otherwise explode into real revolt. The king's humiliation ritualized accountability centuries before Magna Carta, while the debt erasures acted as primitive economic resets. Most profoundly, their belief that order required periodic demolition echoes modern theories of creative destruction, the idea that progress demands occasional upheaval. When we watch fireworks on New Year's Eve or make resolutions, we're distant heirs to Akitu's revolutionary premise. That time isn't a line but a circle demanding yearly rebirth. In the courts of Sumer, a man without a beard was like a king without a crown, stripped of his divine right to command respect. Beards weren't merely facial hair to these ancient people. They were sacred symbols woven into the very fabric of power, wisdom, and masculinity. Kings and priests grew their beards long enough to braid with gold threads, while commoners faced strict sumptuary laws dictating both length and styling. The difference between a laborer's neatly trimmed chin and a ruler's cascading curls wasn't just fashion, it was a visual manifesto of hierarchy, as binding as any legal code. The grooming rituals surrounding these beards bordered on the ceremonial. Scribes left detailed accounts of royal barbers using tweezers made from rare seashells to pluck stray hairs, ensuring each strand laid perfectly. Combs carved from ivory or sandalwood, often inscribed with prayers to Dumuzi, the god of shepherds, and by extension, wool, were used to detangle and anoint beards with fragrant oils like myrrh or cedar. Some of the most elaborate beard accessories have been found in royal tombs. Tiny lapis lazuli beads strung on gold wire to weigh down the ends, or silver rings marking years of reign like arboreal growth rings. But the true power of the beard lay in its spiritual symbolism. Sumerians believed facial hair channeled divine energy, acting as a physical antenna to the gods. This wasn't just poetic metaphor. Priests performing exorcisms would grasp their beards while chanting, thought to amplify their prayers. Legal contracts were sealed not just with fingerprints, but by swearing oaths while clutching another man's beard, a gesture so binding that pulling free during the oath invalidated the agreement. Even the famed Code of Inanna punished beard-related crimes harshly. Forcibly shaving a man against his will carried the same penalty as breaking his arm. The darker side of this obsession reveals itself in archaeological remains. Skeletons from elite burials show signs of follicular stress, patchy beard growth caused by centuries of tight braiding and heavy adornments. One nobleman's remains from Ur had copper residue embedded in his jawline, likely from years of wearing ceremonial beard nets that oxidized against his skin. Medical tablets lament beard rot, a fungal infection caused by unwashed oils accumulating under elaborate styles, yet the social cost of trimming was deemed worse than the discomfort. What's most fascinating is how these customs trickled down through society. While kings wore beards free flowing to their chests, merchants adopted stylish square-cut styles bound with linen strips. Soldiers shaved their cheeks but kept chin beards for gripping under helmet straps. Only two groups went completely hairless: slaves, whose forced shaving marked their subhuman status, and corrupt officials punished by public depilation, a humiliation worse than fines or flogging. Even in death, beards retained their significance. Royal skeletons have been found with false beards attached by bitumen glue, ensuring they met the gods with dignity intact. Commoners unable to grow full beards wore woven wool substitutes in the afterlife, some still clinging to skulls millennia later. The message was clear: from cradle to grave, a Sumerian man's worth was measured not just by his deeds but by the hair on his face, a living testament to his place in the cosmic order. Today, as we debate workplace beard policies or scroll through beard gang posts, we're unknowingly echoing a conversation that began 5,000 years ago in the shadow of ziggurats. The Sumerians simply understood something we often forget: that the choices we make about our bodies are never just personal. They're statements, rituals, and sometimes even battles for identity, written not in stone tablets but in the very follicles of our skin. Beneath the rigid strokes of cuneiform, a script invented for tallying grain and recording laws, flowed some of history's most tender love poetry. The Sumerians, often credited with bureaucracy and commerce, were also the world's first hopeless romantics, etching longing, desire, and heartache into clay tablets with the same precision they used for tax records. These weren't just private whispers, they were literary masterpieces composed by priestesses, kings, and even farmers, revealing a society where love was both an art form and a divine force. Take the famed love song of Shu Sin, written around 2000 BC for a king to recite to his bride. Its lines pulse with startling intimacy. "Bridegroom, let me caress you. My precious caress is more savory than honey." The tablet's edges are worn smooth from handling, suggesting it was read aloud during wedding feasts or even performed with musical accompaniment. But what's most remarkable is its egalitarian spirit, though composed for royalty. Variations of this poem have been found in humble village archives, adapted by commoners who scraped their own declarations onto cheaper clay. The mechanics of these love letters were as deliberate as their content. Scribes used the angular cuneiform script typically pressed into clay with a reed stylus to craft poetic devices that transcended mere words. A surviving tablet from Nippur shows how a suitor arranged symbols in spiraling patterns, forcing the reader to physically rotate the tablet to follow the text, mimicking the dizzying effect of infatuation. Another cleverly used kissing signs two wedges pressed close together, to represent both the act of kissing and the sound of a kiss, a visual pun that would make any modern heart emoji seem crude by comparison. These romantic outpourings weren't just personal expressions, they were woven into the fabric of spirituality. Many love poems doubled as hymns to Inanna, the goddess of love, blurring the line between earthly and divine passion. A particularly steamy example from describes a lover's body in terms usually reserved for temple rituals. "Your shoulders are the altar of the moon, your navel a chalice of cornelian." This wasn't merely metaphor. Sumerians believed physical love mirrored the sacred marriage between gods, making every whispered verse an act of devotion. Yet the letters also reveal love's complications. A poignant tablet from Lhasa records a merchant's plea to his absent wife. "The days without you are like bread without salt, like a boat without oars." The reverse bears her reply, not in cuneiform but in fingernail impressions, a silent language of frustration perhaps too raw for written words. Other tablets hint at love spells, with recipes for ink infused with lotus pollen to make messages irresistible as the floodwaters of spring. The legacy of these clay confessions stretches far beyond antiquity. The Song of Solomon echoes Sumerian imagery, and the tradition of poetic love letters persists in cultures worldwide. But what's most striking is how these fragile tablets shatter stereotypes of ancient people as purely pragmatic. Between inventories of sheep and legal decrees, they carved space for vulnerability, proving that 4,000 years haven't changed the essentials. Love still demands to be written, whether in wedges of clay or pixels on a screen. From bare wages to sacred tattoos, from dream temples to fish-skin clothing, the Sumerians crafted a civilization as bizarre as it was brilliant. These 30 strange practices weren't mere quirks, they were the gears turning the world's first urban machine, each one a testament to humanity's endless creativity in the face of the unknown. What appears irrational to us, bearded kings clutching sheep livers for divine messages, or mothers sipping beer to ease childbirth, was for them a perfect fusion of logic and spirituality, where every action bridged the seen and unseen worlds. Consider the paradoxes they embraced: surgeons sterilizing wounds with silver while chanting to healing goddesses, astronomers tracking Venus to plant crops yet fearing demons in the stars. Their world held no contradiction between science and magic, only layers of understanding we've since peeled apart. Even their darkest rituals, like child sacrifices or cranial binding, stemmed from a profound, if unsettling, desire to control chaos, to bargain with forces beyond their comprehension using the only currency they deemed precious enough: life itself. Yet for all their strangeness, the Sumerians whisper across millennia with startling familiarity. Their love poems ache with the same longing we feel today. Their addiction to beauty, whether through toxic makeup or agonizing tattoos, mirrors our own risky pursuits of perfection and their terror of being forgotten. We've built digital empires to solve that very fear. The differences between us are superficial, the shared humanity runs deep. So here's a question to carry with you. If archaeologists 4,000 years from now sift through our smartphones, our voting booths, our plastic surgery clinics, what will they deem unbearably strange about us? Will they puzzle over our obsession with screens, our rituals of likes and follows, or our medical injections to smooth wrinkles? Will they shudder at our landfills or marvel at our space telescopes? The Sumerians remind us that every civilization is a tapestry of the pragmatic and the peculiar, the sacred and the shocking. Our turn is coming. If these glimpses into humanity's first chapter fascinated you, imagine what else lies buried in history's shadows. Hit subscribe to join me as we keep unearthing the past, one strange, glorious custom at a time. And tell me in the comments which Sumerian practice would you least want to experience yourself. The dung medicine, the sacred marriage rite, or something even wilder? The conversation starts here, just like civilization itself did on the mudflats of Mesopotamia.